Welcome, dear listener, to Stories for Sleep, a place where the past unfolds gently, like a parchment unrolled beneath flickering lamplight. Tonight, we trace the soft footprints of time across the rose-red stones of Petra, the ancient Nabatean city cradled in the canyons of southern Jordan. And if you enjoy drifting through these ancient pathways, don't forget to subscribe and let us know where and when you listen to us. Now, close your eyes if you like. The desert waits. Imagine yourself waking not in your bed, but in a small rock-cut chamber nestled inside the cliffs of Petra. The walls around you are not made of brick or timber, but living sandstone, their pinks and oranges swirling together like almond milk, stirred with honey. The light that filters through the narrow doorway is warm and gold, softening the edges of the world. Outside, the day begins slowly. The air is dry, but not yet hot. A shepherd walks past your dwelling, his goats nimbly trotting along the narrow paths etched into the valley walls. You hear the clatter of wooden sandals, the muted bleating of the animals, and a faint rustle, the sound of your neighbor grinding lentils with a stone quern. This is Petra, not the romantic ruin you may know from postcards or adventure films, but a living, breathing city. In this moment, it is a place where people are already hauling water in clay jars, where bakers tend flatbreads on hot stones, and where traders begin to lay out goods in scents from Arabia, myrrh from the Horn of Africa, textiles from faraway Damascus. You share your morning meal on a low cushion outside your home. It is simple: dates, goat cheese, perhaps a warm porridge with honey if you're lucky. The Nabateans, though wealthy from trade, lived modestly, reserving grandeur for tombs and temples, not breakfast. You eat with your fingers, as is customary, scooping with small pieces of flatbread. Now, let your gaze follow the narrow path down into the heart of the city. It winds through shadowy canyons, carved by water and wind long before human hands took over. The stone here glows in layers rose, ochre, apricot, like the strata of forgotten stories. Further down, the city stirs. Merchants from far-off lands set up their stalls in the colonnaded market street, unfurling silks and unpacking fragrant jars sealed with wax. Children chase each other through sunlit courtyards, their laughter bouncing off the stone. A camel groans lazily as it's loaded for yet another journey into the wilds. But even in this gentle bustle, there is a rhythm. The pace is measured, like the ticking of a slow clock. Petra, for all its grandeur, is a city at ease with itself. You notice how the structures aren't built, but carved hollowed out of cliffs and sculpted from stone. The Nabateans were sculptors of space, not builders in the traditional sense. They read the mountain's grain like calligraphy, allowing their homes and tombs to emerge from the rock rather than be placed upon it. By midday, the heat begins to press gently against your skin. The people retreat into shaded rooms or gather beneath overhangs cooled by woven mats and water vessels designed to let the breeze whisper through. The air smells of dust, jasmine, and something you can't quite name, perhaps cardamom, or the slow-burning resin of a nearby incense burner. Someone nearby is reciting a list of goods, perhaps tallying stock for a caravan about to depart. A scribe, seated cross-legged, uses a stylus to scratch careful marks onto a parchment scroll. Not hurried, not showy, just precise, like everything here. And all around, the walls of Petra keep silent watch. They do not speak loudly, but they remember. They have seen the sun rise and set over countless generations, and they hold those days in their curves and hollows. Let yourself rest in this moment of gentle continuity. The world turns, the city breathes, and the stories unfold not in urgency, but in rhythm. To live in the desert is to strike a quiet bargain with scarcity. Water always water is the question. But the Nabateans, those elusive masters of stone and shadow, were not simply survivors of the dry. They were orchestrators of its rhythm. Imagine, again that golden morning, but now, notice the channels cut into the rock underfoot. Subtle, narrow, almost playful in how they slip between structures and disappear beneath thresholds. These are no accidents of erosion. They are conduits, part of an intricate hydrological ballet that made Petra bloom where nothing should. In a land that gets less than 150 millimeters of rain each year, Petra not only endured, it flourished. Its population, at its peak, may have reached 20,000. How? The answer lies in their quiet genius. High above the city, on seemingly inaccessible ridges, the Nabateans carved catchment areas into the mountain's skin. When rain rare and sudden tumbled from the heavens, it did not scatter or vanish. It was gathered, nudged gently into a network of channels and pipes, filtered through gravel-lined basins, and delivered to cisterns as large as modern swimming pools. The sandstone did more than just form their temples. It helped nourish their lives. It absorbed moisture like a sponge, slowly releasing it into hidden chambers, cool and preserved. Imagine yourself trailing your fingers along one of these channels. The rock is warm, but the water that trickles past is cool, unexpectedly so. You pause near a communal well, watching a woman lower a jar on a rope, her sleeves dusted in red. Powder from the surrounding cliffs. A child beside her hums softly, swaying to a song passed down like the shape of the land. Even the city's steps, those worn smooth by centuries of feet, were laid with water in mind. The slopes directed runoff away from homes and markets, guiding it toward gardens hidden in narrow ravines, where fig trees and herbs grew in defiance of the sun. The Nabateans understood balance. They didn't bend the land to their will. They read its quiet rules and wrote themselves into its margins. They were, in a sense, water whisperers. Not in a mystical sense, but in a deeply practical one. They knew that patience, not force, was the answer. That one could wait for the storm and catch it in cupped hands. It wasn't just for drinking. Water meant hospitality, too. Public fountains modest, often burbled softly in shaded squares, offering refreshment to merchants, travelers, and dusty children alike. To offer water in Petra was not just kindness, it was identity. Now close your eyes a little more, and imagine the quiet gratitude of those who arrived here after weeks in the open desert. To find water, coolness, shade, civilization. Petra was not just a city, it was an oasis carved with foresight. A refuge not only of stone but of strategy. Not loud, not boastful, just deeply, deeply competent. And in this competence, beauty bloomed. Before the sun has fully risen, while the cliffs still cast long, cool shadows and the air hums with desert silence, Petra's traders begin to stir. The city is not merely a home carved into rock, but a node, a crossing, a heartbeat on the Yadi. Great incense roads stretching from the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean. You find yourself walking alongside a caravan, just setting off. The camels kneel patiently in the sand, snorting soft clouds into the chill of morning. Their burdens are not yet tied bundles of myrrh wrapped in coarse cloth, small casks of frankincense sealed with wax, bolts of deep-dyed fabric, and copper vessels hammered into delicate forms. The goods wait like passengers, each one with a story embedded in scent or shape. The traders speak in low voices. Not all are Nabatean. Some wear striped robes common in the Judean highlands. Others bear the markings of southern Arabia. You catch snippets of Aramaic, Greek, perhaps even fragments of Tamil, for the sea is never far in trade, no matter the desert around you. Petra has drawn them all, and not with towering armies or grand proclamations, but with something subtler. Control of the water, the passes, the safety of the route. The Nabateans understood that a trade empire need not conquer only tend the pathways that others must. Follow. As the caravan begins its slow exit from the city, you hear bells jingling gently from the camels' harnesses. The sound is oddly comforting, repeating, rhythmic, like a lullaby worn smooth by centuries. Children wave sleepily from cave dwellings above, their feet dangling over the edge, while their mothers prepare bundles of food, lentil cakes, dried dates, a ball of salted cheese wrapped in a fig leaf. And so begins another journey, the same as thousands before it. You follow the path backwards, toward the heart of Petra. Along the colonnaded street, shopkeepers sweep dust from their thresholds. The stalls are open air, shaded with linen or palm fronds, and already the first exchanges have begun: a goat for a bronze pin, a handful of salt for 2 new sandals. But commerce here is not frantic. It has the softness of routine, the flow of familiarity. The Nabateans are wealthy, yes, but not loud about it. You notice a man counting small coins into a pouch stitched with colored thread, and beside him, a child learning to write numerals on a scrap of parchment. Even their wealth breathes quietly. At the marketplace's edge, a scribe sits cross-legged, behind a simple wooden desk. A customer approaches, unwraps a scroll, and points to a line with concern. They speak calmly. The scribe nods, dips a reed into ink, and makes a neat correction. No raised voices, just the slow correction of details, like tending a garden. A little further on, you smell something familiar, warm, and earthy. It's cardamom, crushed into oil. And beside it, stalls of wine from Gaza, beads from Mesopotamia, and leather sandals imported from northern Arabia. Everything passes through Petra. It is both a city and a sieve. Yet for all its bustle, it remains grounded. There are no marble palaces, no grand colonnades raised simply to impress. Instead, the grandeur lives in the cliffs where tombs and temples are etched into stone, not stacked upon it. Where wealth is not in the number of rooms you own, but in the fact that you can trade silk for grain, incense for knowledge, and water for peace. As you pause beside a quiet fountain, a young girl offers you a drink from a ceramic cup. Her eyes are dark, curious. Her robe is woven with simple geometric patterns, a sign of her tribe, perhaps. She does not speak, but the gesture says enough. In Petra, hospitality is a principle, not a performance. You rest there for a moment, letting the morning sun climb steadily upward. Around you, the market continues not like a roar, but like a hum. Traders laugh softly. Camels grunt. A potter shows off a painted bowl shaped like a curled palm leaf. Everything here is real, grounded, and slow. It's a city not of conquest, but of coordination, not of kings, but of keepers. And as the light spills into every crevice of the stone, Petra does not rise like a monument. It unfolds like a memory. Now let the city slip beneath you. Let your steps rise higher, up a winding path where carved stairs cling to cliff edges and silence deepens with every turn. This is no quick climb. It takes patience. And in Petra, patience is the only pace. That matters. You are walking toward Ad-Dir the monastery. But monastery is a later name, a guess etched by time and translation. To the Nabateans, it was likely a temple, perhaps to the god Dushara, or a place of ritual, high above the hum of commerce. The climb takes time more than 800 steps, carved directly into the rock. You pass others on the trail, a shepherd with a reed flute, 2 travelers sharing a waterskin, a boy carrying a bundle of wood for a vendor at the summit. All breathe slowly, not from exertion, but from awe. For with each step, the world opens wider. You glance back. Petra spreads below like a painting cliffs lined with carved facades, green gardens tucked into ravines, camels like drifting stitches on sand. And beyond, the desert stretches out vast, pale, endless, Finally, the trail flattens, and before you, carved from sheer cliff, stands the monastery. It rises like a secret revealed, massive over 150 feet high, yet soft, somehow, in its stillness. The facade is simpler than the treasuries, but more serene. It does not shout, it waits. The doorway, framed by columns, seems too small for the building's size. But this was always the way of Nabatean design scale, not for show, but for silence. As you approach, the stone feels cool beneath your fingertips, though it has bathed in sunlight all morning. You pass beneath the lintel, into the shadowed interior. It is quiet, so quiet you hear your own breath and the echo of your footsteps. The space is almost empty. No furniture, no inscriptions. Just a central podium, and walls that feel less like they were built and more like they were revealed. And perhaps that is what Petra has always been. A place revealed, not imposed. You sit at the edge of the doorway, looking out over the valley. The breeze is light, and it carries the scent of warm stone and juniper. You think of the hands that carved this so many generations ago. Not with machines, not with haste, but with time. Each chip of stone a whisper, a devotion. And as the sun begins to lower toward the western ridges, casting gold into every carved crevice, you begin to understand Petra's truth. It is not a city that was built. It is a city that was listened to. As the heat begins to soften and the sun casts its last golden ribbons over Petra's walls, the marketplace quiets. Camels sigh and kneel. Merchants pack their wares into linen sacks. The scent of crushed herbs, wax, and roasted lentils lingers in the air like the day's final breath. You slip away from the main street now, deeper into the residential quarters tucked into Petra's rock walls and ravines. These are not palaces or temples, but homes humble and human. A narrow path leads you through an arch carved from stone so finely that it still bears faint traces of floral patterns. This neighborhood has none of the grandeur of the treasury or the monastery, but it is no less sacred. Here, people lived. A door opens quietly, revealing the interior of a Nabatean home. The ceiling is low, the floor scattered with rush mats. Stone shelves are carved directly into the wall, holding pots of barley, small oil lamps, a few bowls carved from wood. No furniture as we know it, just purposeful simplicity. A woman, perhaps 30, with sun-warmed skin and hair, bound in a patterned scarf, kneels to light a fire in the hearth. She moves with grace, her motions fluid from repetition. Beside her, a small boy plays with stones, arranging them into the outline of a caravan, mimicking the adult world in miniature. In one corner, a linen curtain is drawn, hiding a sleeping space lined with furs. A gourd sits beside it, filled with cool water drawn from one of Petra's countless cisterns. The Nabateans, brilliant in trade and diplomacy, were equally genius. With water, rainfall was scarce, but nothing was wasted. Cisterns, reservoirs, and complex canals made Petra bloom where it ought not have. You're offered a small clay cup. Inside, warm goat's milk steeped with sweet herbs, perhaps sage or marjoram. The woman smiles without speaking, the universal language of welcome. She sets a flatbread on the firestone to warm and slices a few dates into a wooden dish. There's no hurry, no rush, just the rhythm of preparation at the day's end. Outside, an old man, her father, perhaps cleans his hands with a damp cloth and begins humming. It's not a song you recognize. The melody dips and loops gently, like water trickling over stones. The boy hums along, then forgets the tune, distracted by the fire's crackling. Life here is close to the earth. No wasted space. No idle hands. The walls are not merely stone, but memory. Every scratch and soot mark tells of meals cooked, stories told, feet that padded across the room long before your visit. You notice the faint traces of paint on the walls, reds and ochres, forming fading. Patterns. The Nabateans painted their interiors in warm tones, not to impress outsiders, but to soothe themselves. They lived with texture, with color, even when surrounded by sand and stone. Outside the home, the path winds past other dwellings. Each is slightly different. One has carved niches filled with simple figurines, gods, or ancestors. Another features a basin by the door for washing feet. Children run barefoot, chasing one another in the dust, their laughter flitting through the air like birdsong. Further along, you reach a communal courtyard. Several families have gathered. Women knead dough while talking, their voices weaving together like thread. An elder sits at the center, reciting something, perhaps a tale or a memory. You catch the word Dushara, the Nabatean deity of strength and sky. The listeners nod slowly, not in awe but in familiarity. Their gods are not distant. They live in the stone, in the springs, in the stars. Someone begins playing a small flute. The melody rises like steam, light and meandering. The children fall quiet. Even the camels in the distance pause to listen. And then comes the dusk call, not a formal prayer, not a shouted cry, but a silence. A deep pause as the sun finally slips behind the rose-colored cliffs and the first stars emerge. One by one, lamps are lit. Their flickering light bounces across the stone walls, casting shadows that seem to move with breath. You are invited to sit. A cushion is offered. A plate of warm barley and chickpeas, drizzled with oil, is passed your way. The bread is chewy and warm, the olives sharp and briny. No one rushes. The night is long. There will be time for everything. Someone begins to tell a story, not of gods or battles, but of a long-ago caravan lost in a sandstorm and found again by a clever woman who listened to the wind. The listeners nod. The boy with the stone sits wide-eyed, hands still. Stories are lessons here, and they echo. Petra's greatness is not only in what it built, but in how its people lived. How they carved lives into stone. How they met the desert with patience and joy. How they made a home in a place where few would try. As you rise to leave, the woman presses a fig into your hand, a farewell, or perhaps an invitation to return. And you walk away slowly, back through the quiet alleys, past the homes whose light flickers softly like stars pulled down from the sky. You've seen the pictures, of course. The towering columns, the ornate carvings, the impossibly intricate. Facade etched into the rose-colored stone. Tourists call it the treasury. Locals call it Al-Khazna. But now, as you stand before it, the real thing looms tall as a 6-story building, hushed in the shadow of early morning. And it's quiet. No flashbulbs, no chatter. Just you and the wind curling through the sick, brushing against the carved. Columns as if to wake them from their 2,000-year slumber. From afar, the treasury appears symmetrical, clean, even flawless. But up close, it's anything but. The sandstone has softened with time. Bullet marks remnants of Bedouins long ago, who believed treasure was hidden in the urn at the top pepper its facade. Moss lingers in shaded crevices. Tiny bits of graffiti, ancient and modern, interrupt the grandeur. What was it, really? Not a treasury, most likely. The name comes from the local legend that a pharaoh hid gold in that central urn, high above your head, but archaeologists suspect it was something else. Perhaps a royal tomb, perhaps a temple, perhaps both. Let's look closer. The columns, although Corinthian in style, have a Nabatean flair, an architectural dialect that blends Roman formality with Eastern ornament. Over the entrance, a frieze depicts twin eagles, guardians of the soul. Above them, mythical figures, Amazons, perhaps, or Nabatean goddesses pose stiffly in niches. One raises a hand in a gesture that might have meant welcome or beware. Step inside. The inner chamber is dim and echoing. It's smaller than you'd expect. The walls are smooth, but bear no inscriptions, just veins of color that twist like candle smoke through the rose-red stone. Here and there, niches suggest offerings. The space hums with potential, like a room waiting to remember its purpose. There's a solemnity to the treasury that no photograph captures. It's not just the scale, but the silence, the way the building seems to listen, to breathe through the rock. Some believe it was the tomb of King Aretas IV, Petra's most celebrated ruler. Others argue it was a ceremonial hall, its grandeur meant to impress rather than entomb. In truth, we may never know. The Nabateans, practical as they were poetic, didn't leave behind the tidy labels we moderns crave. And yet, the very mystery is part of its magic. Imagine the arrival of a caravan leader, dusty and tired after weeks in the desert. Imagine turning that final bend of the sick and seeing this sudden burst of grandeur. It wasn't just a monument, it was a message, a declaration of Petra's wealth, skill, and cosmopolitan soul. The Nabateans built this not to hide, but to be seen. And though their language faded, their city swallowed by time and sand, the treasury endures as an unanswered question etched in stone. And that's what makes it sacred, not just for what it was, but for what it still asks. As the sun rises, light pours down the treasury's facade, setting it ablaze with warm hues: peach, rose, coral, and copper. The urn gleams, empty as always. The stone whispers, as if amused by our guesses. The treasury holds no gold, only silence. And that, perhaps, is the real treasure. Let's walk back, slowly, through the narrow, winding canyon that leads to Petra, like a ribbon pulled through the mountains. At first glance, it feels like nature's own sculpture. Towering sandstone cliffs on either side, some nearly 100 meters tall. But this wasn't left entirely to chance. The Nabateans carved and shaped it, subtly guiding both the travelers' feet and their eyes. They understood drama. And this was their stage. The sick begins not abruptly, but quietly. You leave the modern world behind at Bab al-Sik, passing scattered tombs and a worn, cobbled path. Then the walls begin to rise, slowly at first, as though unsure whether to welcome or engulf you. Step by step, the path narrows. Sunlight filters in from above in shards, never fully reaching the ground. The stone underfoot is smooth, worn by centuries of footsteps, traders, priests, mothers, soldiers, children. Their echoes live here, layered and soft, like stories whispered from behind curtains. On your left, a faint groove runs along the canyon wall, a Nabatean aqueduct. Ingenious in its simplicity, it once carried water from a distant spring all the way into the city. Rain was rare, but they caught every drop. You can still see the plaster in some places, cracked but persistent. High on the walls, carved into ledges and niches, are fading figures. Reliefs of gods, now faceless. A camel's legs. The worn outline of a man in flowing robes. Time hasn't erased them, only blurred their names. And then you come upon something strange, a square block, cut directly into the cliff, standing alone like a sentinel. It's a betil, a sacred stone. No face, no form. The Nabateans believed that divinity didn't need a body. Their gods could be felt in stone, in air, in the rush of water through a channel. The Sikh is a place of thresholds. Physically, yes, it leads into the heart of Petra, but symbolically too. Walking through it feels like slipping between worlds. One moment you're in the open desert. The next, surrounded by vertical walls that seem to hum with old memory. The colors shift as you walk. Sandstone is deceptive. What looks red from a distance becomes striped up close. Bands of white, ochre, mauve, and violet. The walls seen too, shimmer in the changing light, as if the rock itself breathes. Every turn offers surprise, a sudden widening, a cluster of birds darting overhead. The curve where a chariot might have scraped too close, leaving faint wheel marks etched in stone. It's not just a passage, it's a narrative, a prelude to the city. And then, without warning, a treasury appears. It's a theatrical reveal. The path bends gently, and there it is, framed perfectly in the narrow opening ahead. Not rushed, not shouted, just revealed like a secret finally shared. That single view, called the Silk Veil, is one of the most photographed images in archaeology. And yet, in this quiet moment, it feels like yours alone. The Nabateans knew this effect. They built the sick as experience, not just access. Every step draws you closer, not just to a city, but to a mood, a reverence. Walking back out, the canyon feels different. The way stone catches sound, the way shadows stretch long across the path. You notice more now a petroglyph here, a scrap of pottery there, a half-erased inscription tucked above head height. Evidence of life lived slowly and cleverly. You imagine the sun setting. The walls glow like embers. Coolness returns. The canyon grows silent again, except for one sound, the soft trickle of water still moving through its ancient channel, stubborn. As memory and you walk slowly, letting your hand graze the wall, just once, to feel the centuries resting under your palm. Imagine waking just before sunrise in Petra, not as a visitor, but as someone who lives there. Someone with dust under their nails, not a map in hand, a merchant perhaps, or a potter, or a midwife stepping out into the cool air of a desert. Morning, shawl pulled tight, heading toward a berth deep in the canyon dwellings. For all its grandeur, those towering facades and echoing tombs, Petra was, above all, a working city. And cities run not on monuments, but on people. Traders were the lifeblood of Petra. The Nabateans built their fortunes not by conquest, but by controlling movement. They weren't conquerors. They were connectors. And so, every morning, the marketplace would begin to hum. Tents and lean-tos unfurling in the shade of the cliffs. Camels being unloaded, their cargo wrapped in woven blankets, their legs crusted with the sand of distant kingdoms. From the incense roots of Arabia came frankincense and myrrh resins that burned like perfume, used in rituals from Babylon too. Rome, from India, spices, cardamom, turmeric, cinnamon. From China, bolts of silk, glinting like water in the sunlight. From the Mediterranean, glass beads, amphorae, and scrolls. In Petra, everything had a price, and everything had a path. But not all work involved commerce. Walk deeper into the residential quarters, past the grand carved facades, and into the humbler dwellings' low entrances. Soot-darkened ceilings, courtyards where chickens cluck and women kneel to grind grain. Here, labor had a rhythm more intimate and necessary. A potter might begin the day beside their wheel, shaping clay pulled from the nearby Wadi Musa. The vessels were functional, but beautiful too, painted with swirling geometric motifs or dipped in earthy glazes that caught the sun. A weaver sat, cross-legged in the corner, her loom tilted against the stone wall, fingers deftly pulling colored threads. Petra's textiles were prized, not just for their patterns, but for the dye's crushed roots, minerals, and rare insects, yielding hues that seemed to glow from within. And then there were the healers and midwives, mostly women, trained not in theory, but in practice past, down through generations. They brewed teas from desert herbs, ground powders to soothe coughs and fevers, and stood steady in candlelit rooms as babies entered the world, slick and wailing. Earth was sacred in Petra. The goddess Al-Usa was often invoked, her strength imagined flowing into the hands of the midwife. Children played in the alleys, chasing goats, rolling hoops carved from branches. Some would go on to become stonemasons apprenticing from youth, learning to chip and shape with reverence. Others might learn navigation, memorizing the constellations, used by their caravaner elders, who whispered the secrets of the road beneath a sky full of stars. And yes, there were map makers too, not the parchment scribbling kind we imagine in libraries, but oral cartographers. Nabatean guides could describe a route from Gaza to Mecca without ever writing it down. Every dune, every wadi, every distant outcrop had a name, a story, a meaning. These routes were remembered like songs and passed down like sacred texts. Temples employed full-time staff as well ritual specialists. Singers, water-bearers, stone polishers, even caretakers for the sacred animals. Religious life was woven into the daily grind, not hovering above it. Offerings were left not just during festivals, but on market days, before trade deals, or after births and funerals. And behind every transaction, there was a system. Nabateans, clever and forward-thinking, had scribes and record-keepers. Their script, a curling, almost playful alphabet, was carved into walls and written onto scrolls. These weren't simply prayers or poems, but receipts, contracts, names. A record of a life, left in ink or etched in stone. Among all these trades, the lines between sacred and mundane often blurred. A pot might bear a symbol of Dushara, the main deity. A cloth might be woven with protection motifs. A trade agreement might be sealed beside a temple, watched over by statues of gods with no mouths, silent witnesses. As the sun rose higher and heat pressed down, work slowed. Shade was prized. Meals were taken communally, flatbread baked in. Simple ovens, lentils stewed with spices, dates split and stuffed with nuts. Laughter drifted from doorways. Gossip, too. Who was pregnant? Who had arrived in last night's caravan? Whose husband had wandered too far in the marketplace and returned, lighter in coin. And when the sun began to soften again, so did the day. Traders returned to their shelters, counting profits. Children dragged themselves home, limbs scratched and smiling. Women washed linens in the stream. The stone of the city shifted in hue, once more from gold to coral, then dusky plum. The clink of tools gave way to music. Strings, flutes, and hand drums played in slow cadence. Stories began tales of far-off lands, of clever spirits, of gods who once walked in human skin. Petra, it seems, was not only a city of stone and trade, but a voice. To live in Petra was to participate in something larger than yourself. A web of people, gods, seasons, and sandstone. Even the smallest job carrying water, sweeping a courtyard, painting the rim of a jar, was part of the city's rhythm. A beat echoed in the footsteps of its workers, in the sigh of the sick, in the hush that followed sunset. And though their names are mostly lost, their presence remains in every groove worn into the market stones, every kill buried beneath wind-blown soil, every faint fingerprint in the glaze of a forgotten bowl. The trades of Petra weren't just survival. They were language, culture, memory. 1,000 small acts of making and giving, stitched into the cliffs like thread through fabric. The first time you see it, really see it, you stop breathing for a moment. It's not just the carved pillars or the vast scale of the facades. It's not the red-gold hue of the sandstone, nor the impossible precision. It's the way the buildings rise from the very earth, as if the gods had once dipped their fingers into the rock and sculpted dwellings from the bones of the world. This was Petra's architectural secret. It was subtractive, not additive. The Nabateans didn't build with stone blocks. They didn't stack in mortar. They removed, they hollowed, they revealed, to carve a structure like all Khaznavi. Treasury was not merely a feat of engineering. It was an act of patience bordering on the sacred. Workers began at the top, chiseling slowly downward. One mistake and the symmetry was ruined. One cracked ledge and tons of rock might come crashing. Down, there was no margin for error. And yet, error rarely shows its face here. Every cornice, every rosette, every eagle and urn is precisely placed. But more than precision, it's the harmony that arrests you. The way architectural motifs blend styles. Hellenistic columns, Egyptian cornices, Assyrian friezes. A classical. Pediment rises atop Nabatean niches. It's a conversation in stone between worlds. And yet this was not mimicry. The Nabateans weren't simply copying their neighbors. They were absorbing them, filtering foreign styles through their own cultural sieve, blending and distilling until the result was entirely theirs. A kind of visual diplomacy. A way of saying, we see you, we respect you, and we've made something. Better, Al-Khazna may be the most famous, but it is far from alone. The royal tombs, etched into the cliffs like a row of solemn guardians. The urn tomb, with its vast hall and unexpected echoes. The Corinthian tomb, the silk tomb named for the vivid marbling in its stone. Each a marvel, yet each distinct. But not all of Petra's architecture is grand. If you walk deeper into the city, past the tourist-thronged facades, and into the true heart of Nabatean life, you find subtler wonders. Take the cisterns, for example. Petra, for all its majesty, sits in a harsh and water-scarce landscape. Rainfall is rare, rivers are seasonal at best. And yet the city thrived. Why? Because the Nabateans turned the very cliffs into tools. Channeling water from distant springs, they carved covered canals into the stone hidden from the sun to minimize evaporation. They built settling pools, filtration chambers, and reservoirs capable of storing millions of liters. Some cisterns were so cleverly placed that they filled almost invisibly after even minor rainfall. A drop here, a trickle there caught, saved, preserved. This wasn't just engineering. It was understanding, a reading of the land's breath and rhythm. Petra's builders listened to the desert and answered with stone. Their homes were simpler, but still carved with care. Small chambers, often 2 or 3 linked together, nestled into the canyon walls. They had niches for oil lamps, raised sleeping platforms, and sometimes faint traces of pigment reds and ochres painted in flowing patterns across the stone. In one such dwelling, archaeologists found a carved star ceiling, its tiny points barely visible unless you knew to look. A quiet ornament, perhaps meant for a child's room. Proof that beauty was not reserved for temples alone. And what of their temples? Oh, they sang. The Temple of the Winged Lions, with its ornate capitals and floral reliefs, stood as a sanctuary to a goddess now forgotten. Incense would have burned there, curling into the rafters. Priests and priestesses in flowing robes chanted prayers beneath carved lions, whose wings spread protectively over the chamber. Near the center of the city stands the great temple, vast, tiered, and filled with mystery. Once thought to be a civic building, it is now believed to have had religious importance. Its massive columns, some still upright, others toppled, speak of grandeur. A reminder that, while the Nabateans honored many gods, they built spaces for them that matched the heavens. Perhaps most intriguing is Petra's amphitheater carved directly into the mountain. It seats over 6,000 people. Think of that. A city built on trade with no army to speak of, no imperial ambitions, and yet it built an amphitheater to rival those in Rome. Here, the people of Petra gathered not for blood sport, but likely for civic announcements, poetry, music, and ritual. When the wind blows just right, it still sings through the stones. Stone, in Petra, is more than material. It's a medium of memory. The cliffs hold the scars of chisel marks, the whispers of artisans whose names have vanished. And yet there, work endures not as ruins, but as ongoing conversation. Look closely at the niches beside the temples. You'll see beetles' sacred stones, often uncarved. To us, they may seem plain, but to the Nabateans, these were the gods themselves. Not representations, not stand-ins, but divinity embodied in the very rock. It's fitting, really. A people who carved their city from stone also worshipped it. As the day draws to a close in Petra, the architecture shifts again. The sunlight softens, walls glow, shadows stretch, and the facades begin to appear less like buildings and more like living things. Their eyes open, their mouths murmur. The city isn't empty. It breathes. You realize, perhaps for the first time, that Petra was never meant to be merely seen. It was meant to be moved through, felt, heard. The way a song isn't just notes, but silence between them. Petra's architecture isn't about what was built. It's about what was left, what was shaped, what endures. And if you listen, if you're still enough, you'll hear it. Not the echoes of tourists or guides or cameras, but the deeper, older music, the hum of stone remembering. Step lightly now, for we are crossing into sacred ground, not marked by golden altars or towering statues, but by silence. In Petra, the divine was rarely loud. It was carved into corners, tucked into niches, etched in patterns of absence. It whispered, rather than roared. The Nabateans, you see, had a relationship with their gods that was more felt than formalized. There were no dogmatic texts to memorize, no great councils to argue theology. Their religion unfolded in shadows and sandstone. It was intuitive, practical, and wrapped in mystery. To begin understanding it, we must start with the beetles. You've seen them already, perhaps without noticing. Small rectangular or rounded blocks of stone, simple, unadorned, standing alone in niches carved into cliff walls or temple corners. To our modern eyes, they might look unfinished, forgotten. But to the Nabateans, these were the divine made manifest. The word Betil comes from the Semitic bet El, house of God. These were not just symbolic markers. The Betil was the God itself, not a representation, not a placeholder, a presence. Their simplicity was intentional. Without eyes, mouths, or limbs, the gods remained unknowable, beyond likeness, beyond our grasp. Imagine yourself walking the winding gorge of the Sick at dawn, the sun only barely brushing the tops of the cliffs. You pause before one of these niches. The stone is cold, the air still, and there, nestled in shadow, stands a squat, smooth rectangle of sandstone. There are no prayers written on it, no plaque to tell you what to feel, and yet you feel something. This was the rhythm of Nabatean devotion, not sermons or statues, but moments of encounter, spaces to breathe with the divine. Among their pantheon, there were familiar names. Dushara, the great god of the mountains, whose domain extended over the high places. Al-Yuza, goddess of might and protection. Alat and Manat, tied to fate and time. Some were borrowed from Arabia, others from further west. But always they were transformed through Petra's particular lens of reverence. Dushara, for instance, was often represented by a simple upright stone, tall and narrow. No face, no crown, no thunderbolt in hand. He was there in the cliffs, in the stone beneath your sandals, in the shifting red dust of the canyon floor. He didn't need to be seen. He simply was. There were open-air sanctuaries called high places, perched atop Petra's cliffs. To reach them, you climbed steep stone stairs worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. At the summit, the wind sings louder, and you come upon a flat altar carved into the rock. A basin for libations, a channel to drain offerings. Perhaps a carved seat for a priest. No roof, no walls. Just sky. Rituals performed here likely involved incense, water, and perhaps animal sacrifice, though the details remain veiled. The silence. Of the gods extended the archaeologist's chisel. No texts survive to tell us the prayers, no murals to depict the rites. And yet, the space tells its own story. Look at how the altar faces east. Imagine the light rising over the cliffs, striking. The stone at just the right angle. Picture a priest in white, lifting a vessel of fragrant smoke into the morning air. Worship here wasn't about grandeur. It was about alignment, rhythm, attunement to place. Inside Petra, religion wove seamlessly into daily life. Small shrines were everywhere beside roads, near homes, at the gates to tombs. Travelers would pause before a journey to offer a few grains or a drop of oil. Traders passed by the beetles with reverent glances. Perhaps a whispered word, perhaps only a gesture. There was no separation between the sacred and the mundane. The gods were not distant. They lived in the stone, in the water channels, in the silence. And then there were the procession's ceremonial walks through the city, perhaps tied to seasonal events or important trade arrivals. We can't know their exact dates or routes, but hints remain in the layout of Petra's pathways. Wide staircases, deliberate alignments, sight lines between temple and tomb. We can imagine a procession moving slowly through the street of facades, incense curling in the air, children scattering flower petals, music echoing from flutes and drums. People dressed in flowing robes, their faces painted with red ochre. At the front, a priest carries a sacred object, perhaps a portable batil, cloaked in dyed linen, held aloft like a lantern of stone. The crowd is hushed. Not out of fear, but respect. Even the camels seem to tread more softly. And yet, the gods of Petra never shouted. They never demanded blood or fire. They asked instead for reverence, for presence, for recognition in the grain of the rock and the shape of the cliff. When Roman influences entered the city in the 1st century CE, new temples rose like the Kaiser Albint, with its grand courtyard and massive staircase. Its proportions are imposing, its columns monumental. Yet even here, you find traces of the older ways. A niche where a batil would have stood. An altar carved from native stone, not imported marble. The Nabateans adapted, but they never abandoned. They're desert gods. Even as Roman statues filled Petra's courtyards, somewhere in the quiet corners of the city, the simple blocks remained. And perhaps that's the lesson Petra offers. In a world of noise and glitter, it was a culture that found the divine in restraint, in stillness, in the patience of stone. The gods here did not rule with thunder or flame. They dwelled in the winds. Sigh, in the chill of dawn, in the curve of a chisel's mark. Always watching, always listening. Even now, if you sit in one of Petra's high places as the sun sets, you may feel them. Not as booming voices or miraculous signs, but as a quiet knowing, a presence that settles on your shoulders like ancient dust. So we leave the sanctuaries behind and descend once more into the city, past the beetles, the altars, the silent gods. The stone watches, it remembers, and we walk on. Let us now drift into Petra's pulsing heart, not its temples or tombs, but its markets. This is where the living mingled, where languages overlapped, and where the city's soul truly revealed itself. Picture a cool desert morning, the sunlight, slipping between pink cliffs, falling softly onto dusty lanes. The scent of spices drifts through the air, cinnamon, frankincense, cumin, and cardamom. You hear the shuffle of feet on stone, the grumble of camels rising from rest, and the distant tinkling of bronze bells tied to their necks. This is Petra, not as a monument, but as a living, breathing crossroads. You might imagine a grand central marketplace, neatly organized, with tidy stalls and hanging signs. But Petra was never quite that predictable. The city's trade flowed like water, sometimes structured, sometimes spontaneous. Goods exchanged hands in wide courtyards, shaded alcoves, or beneath striped tents set up beside sandstone facades. Merchants from across the known world came here. From Alexandria, laden with scrolls and dyed linens. From Damascus, with silk and dried figs. From southern Arabia, with frankincense resin wrapped in palm leaves. And from India, spices so potent they seemed to warm the air. And then there were the camels, grumpy, majestic beasts of burden, their humps rising above the bustle like ships. Sails in a harbor. They were the lifeblood of Petra's economy, able to carry hundreds of pounds across searing deserts, needing little water and less complaint. Each caravan was a small kingdom of its own, complete, with cooks, guards, traders, and guides. They arrived in Petra through narrow desert passes, tired and dust-covered. And yet, as soon as they passed into the city's rose-colored embrace, something changed. The air became cooler, the water more abundant, and the trade brisk and rich came. Alive, a young boy from a local Nabatean family might lead you to a stall, his sandals slapping against stone. Good incense, he'd say in a mix of Aramaic and Greek, lifting a clay pot for you to smell. Or perhaps a merchant in flowing white robes would offer glass beads from Sidon, wrapped carefully in linen, each one catching the light like a drop of the Mediterranean. Coins clink. Words pass quickly, sometimes in 3 languages at once. Haggling is not just expected, it's respected. Bargains are sealed with handshakes, meals, or shared cups of date wine. There's a rhythm to it all, a kind of musicality in the market's noise. What made Petra extraordinary wasn't just the volume of trade, but the efficiency. The Nabateans were logistical masters. They had built cisterns and reservoirs at every oasis along their routes. They taxed traders fairly, but cleverly. Instead of extorting passing merchants, they offered safety, water, storage, and shade. In exchange, Petra thrived. Some scholars believe Petra may have operated like a vast, duty-free warehouse, where goods were offloaded, repackaged, and sent onward. Indian pepper, for instance, may have arrived in bulk and then been portioned into neat Nabatean ceramic jars, lighter and easier to transport west. Local artisans even made false markings to resemble Roman labels, knowing their clients. Preferred familiarity. Walk further into the market quarter, and you'd find the workshops. Here, potters spin wheels with rhythmic thuds. Silversmiths hammer delicate patterns into earrings and armlets. Glassblowers turn molten sand into luminous vessels that reflect. The pink cliffs behind them. A woman in a striped headscarf haggles over a bronze mirror. A Greek traveler leans on his staff, eyeing a folded map inked in Nabatean script. An older man in embroidered robes grumbles about last week's pepper prices. Children dart between stalls, giggling, snatching bits of dried fruit left too close to the edge. It's lively, but not chaotic, because beneath it all, Petra runs on. Experience. This city didn't just spring from the sand it evolved. Every rock-cut staircase, every carved bench, every clever drainage channel, guiding rainwater. Away from stalls, all of it testifies to a people who understood the balance of movement and rest, of noise and stillness. And through it all wins. The caravan road itself, paved with compacted stone, worn smooth by generations of hooves and sandals. It stretches south to Arabia, north to Damascus, and beyond. At certain hours, one might witness a caravan setting out again. The lead camel, adorned with colorful tassels, its handler chanting a rhythmic tune to keep the animals calm. Children waving goodbye, merchants tallying their last sales, and the dust rising behind them, caught in the morning light like desert incense. But Petra does not mourn their leaving. The city was built on comings and goings. It thrived in the in-between, in the pause between desert and destination, between goods exchanged and friendships formed. This was Petra's genius. It didn't try to conquer empires or build fleets. It offered something subtler and perhaps more powerful connection. It became the thread that stitched east to west, spice to coin, person to person. Even now, if you walk those same stony paths, you can almost hear it. The murmur of negotiation, the clink of coin, the deep, steady breathing of camels waiting their turn. So pause here in Petra's heart and feel the rhythm of trade. For in this city of stone, it was the sound of life. Now let us drift a little, further into Petra's fragrant history, a world built not only on rock and commerce, but on the whispering trails of scent. To the modern imagination, incense might feel like a decorative afterthought, reserved for temples or spas. But in Petra's time, it was as valuable as silver, as prized as grain, as defining to a kingdom's wealth as its roads or walls. Frankincense and myrrh, those twin treasures of the ancient aromatic trade, were not simply perfumes. They were sacred, medicinal, even strategic. And the Nabateans controlled their flow like skilled conductors of an invisible orchestra. Start in the south, far beyond the stone rows of Petra, in the green hills of Dhofar, where boswellia trees cling to. Dry cliffs. From their bark, frankincense leaks like milky tears, slowly drying into translucent gems. Reason, they called it. Treasure, we might say. Cut from trees, sorted by hand, and packed tightly into palm leaf satchels, it began its long, slow journey. North through blinding heat, sandstorms, and starlit campsites. Hundreds of miles passed beneath calloused feet and patient camels, and all of it led to Petra. Imagine being there upon one such arrival, the air heavy with the resin's spicy sweetness. A caravan's worth of goods laid out like jewels across. The ground, pale yellow frankincense, darker reddish myrrh, blackened chunks from older trees, each with its own scent, its own price. The Nabateans didn't just pass these goods on. They elevated them. They stored them in dry caves, repackaged them in fine ceramics, and controlled the rhythm of their distribution like stage managers pulling back velvet curtains. Because here's the quiet truth. Petra's greatness didn't lie in conquest. It lay in control. Other powers fought battles. Petra fought for roots. Other kings expanded borders. Nabatean rulers expanded networks carefully, methodically, through diplomacy and desert wisdom. And the incense routes were their lifeblood. Frankincense wasn't burned only in temples. It masked the smell of crowds in city forums. It flavored oils used for healing. Myrrh soothed wounds, embalmed bodies, and flavored medicines. To the ancient world, these were not luxuries. They were necessities, spiritual and physical ones. So Petra became the gatekeeper. Roman senators inhaled Nabatean incense while drafting edicts. Egyptian priests waved it over altars to the gods. Merchants in Athens paid heavily for a few pinches to perfume their clothes. And every coin that passed through those eager hands left a trace in Petra's stone vaults, in its fine clothes, in its people's confidence. You might wonder, did they ever tire of the scent? Perhaps, but more likely, they became attuned to its subtleties. A seasoned trader could tell the origin of a resin from a single whiff. Dhofar, Socotra, or the Horn of Africa each left a different tingle in the nose, a sharper note here, a sweeter burn there. In Petra, incense was not merely smelled, it was read like a script, and not all of it went north. Some of it stayed. In private homes, a small burner might fill a room with warmth. In healing practices, resins were ground and mixed with honey or wine, a non-alcoholic kind, naturally, for tonics. At religious gatherings, clouds of smoke rose like threads toward the heavens. One can picture the streets near dusk, calm and soft in the evening breeze. Families returning from the market, dinners prepared over low flames, and here and there, a thin wisp of incense curling from a carved window, catching the last light. The Nabateans did not build towering ziggurats or vast libraries, but they understood something far subtler, the way scent moves through memory, the way it ties one moment to another. Their incense was more than trade. It was story. And perhaps that's why Petra feels so haunting, even now. Though the resins are long gone, their ghostly sweetness seems to linger in the stone. As if the cliffs themselves remember every trade, every offering, every secret blessing whispered over a smoking pot. So inhale gently, dear listener. The scent of empire once passed through these walls, and somewhere, beneath the sand and silence, it still lingers. Let us now turn to a marvel even more elusive than wealth or power water. For what is a city without it? Imagine Petra again, not as a ruin, but as it once lived. A thriving city in the heart of the desert. A place with gardens, fountains, bathing, pools, and vineyards, and all of it built on water. Or rather, the impossible mastery of it. The Nabateans did not discover an oasis and build a city. They carved a city where no oasis should have flourished. They coaxed water from stone, guided it with grace, and turned a parched ravine into a blossoming capital. It begins with rain. Rare, precious rain. In Petra's desert climate, it might rain only a handful of times a year. But when it came, ah, how it came. A sudden, thundering downpour crashing against the cliffs, sending torrents of water racing through narrow canyons like a stampede. And that precisely is where the Nabateans waited. Their engineers carved channels into the very rock, capturing the flow before it could vanish into sand. They built dams and diversion tunnels. They dug cisterns so vast they could store millions of liters. They even lined walls with waterproof plaster, a recipe lost to us, still puzzling modern scientists. But their greatest gift? Patience. They understood the rhythms of their land. They didn't fight the flood. They danced with it. They let it rush and roar, then slowed it with stair-stepped reservoirs, gentled it with carved slopes, and guided it home. You can still trace their handiwork today. Along cliff faces, slender channels snake like ancient veins. In the canyons, massive clay pipes peek from broken rock. Near temples, open pools shimmer in the morning sun, silent and still, but once full of purpose. And all of this without electric pumps, without concrete, without maps as we know them. Instead, the Nabateans used intuition, trial, community wisdom passed from builder to apprentice, etched not just into stone but into memory. Every drop mattered. Every overflow had a plan. In a land where water was life, miscalculation was not an option. And so, they didn't miscalculate. They thrived. Some say Petra's engineers could make the desert bloom. And in a way, they did. Gardens once flourished behind those red cliffs' terraced plots, filled with herbs, figs, and grapes. In shaded courtyards, trickling fountains cooled the air. Women washed linens in clear basins. Children splashed in spring-fed pools. Water wasn't just survival, it was beauty. And perhaps, in the quietest of moments, it was even sacred. Many of Petra's temples feature water channels running directly through their courtyards. Ritual ablutions, symbolic cleansing, or perhaps simply the joy of water's presence in a place where it should not have been. The city's very layout obeys water. Homes cluster near cisterns. Roads curve to follow channels. Even the treasuries. Grand facade so famous, so carved, stands not far from the path of collected floodwaters, carefully redirected beneath the surface. This was a city carved not just by hand, but by rainfall. And like all things in Petra, it worked best when unseen. The brilliance was in the silence of it, the absence of scarcity, the assumption, by residents and visitors alike, that water simply was, but it wasn't simple. It was planned, honed, revered. And in the end, when the climate shifted and trade routes moved and kingdoms fell, Petra's silence returned. The channels dried. The pools emptied. The gardens withered. But the stone remains quiet testimony to a people who shaped the desert's heartbeat. So, as we rest in this quiet section of our journey, let us marvel not at what they built, but how they thought, how they listened, how they read the land and shaped it with humility and care. The desert is still here. The cliffs still rise. And though the water no longer flows, the memory of it echoes soft, patient, and extraordinary. As the sun dips below the jagged cliffs of Petra, the shadows lengthen, and the stone seems to darken with memory. This is when the tombs begin to speak not with words, but with their stillness. Death, in the Nabatean world, was not hidden away. It was not pushed to the edge of town or masked in layers of ritual dread. It stood openly monumentally among the living. Walk through Petra's valleys, and you will find the dead not underground, but inside the very cliffs. Dozens upon dozens of tombs, carved by hand into sandstone, stacked in rows like an orchestra of silence. And what tombs they are! Some bear ornate facades, with pediments, columns, and flourishes that rival any temple. Others are simpler, just a rectangular doorway and an empty interior, but all share a sense of solemn grace. They were not made to be frightening. They were not haunted. They were peaceful, unblinking, permanent. In many cultures, tombs face the rising sun, but Petra's tombs often face west, toward the setting light, toward rest, toward the soft hush that comes at the end of the day. For the Nabateans, this wasn't just poetic, it was practical. The heat of the morning stayed away. The soft amber light of evening bathed the stone. It was as if the city itself paused to honor them. We know little about Nabatean funerary rites. No great written texts survive, no long scrolls explaining their philosophy of the afterlife. But we can read between the stone lines. Tombs often held families, not just individuals. Deep niches were carved into the walls to receive bodies, sometimes several generations within a single chamber. This was not the burial of strangers. It was the quiet reunion of kin. And nearby, inscriptions carved in fine lettering named the departed, sometimes with a phrase of blessing, sometimes with only a name and a date. The economy of their words tells us something. What mattered was not grandeur, but remembrance. Now imagine a burial procession. It's early morning. The city is hushed. A line of figures winds through the sick, the narrow gorge leading into Petra. They carry garlands of dried herbs, perhaps sage or desert marjoram. Clay lamps flicker in their hands. The body, wrapped in linen, rests upon a carved wooden bier. No dramatic wailing. Just soft steps, dust rising. They reach the family tomb. The door is opened a stone slab, lifted with care. Inside, coolness, stillness, the scent of ancient earth. The body is placed in its niche. Perhaps a few belongings accompany it. A ring, a bowl, a small amphora of perfume. The door is sealed again. And outside, those left behind sit quietly. They do not speak much. The stone speaks enough. Back in the city, life resumes. Markets open. Water jugs clink. But somewhere, in the quiet cliffs, another name has joined the city's memory. Not gone, just moved. Some tombs in Petra were never used. Some were half-carved and left unfinished. Why? We do not know. Perhaps their owners died before completion. Perhaps politics changed. Or perhaps the stone itself dictated terms crumbling. Resisting, defying human will. Even in death, Petra listened to the rock. And those who carved these tombs, what of them? Stonemasons, artists, laborers, they wielded hammer and chisel, not for temples or kings, but for the still rooms of the departed. One chip at a time, one careful groove. Some even left behind graffiti small, scratched symbols in hidden corners. A reminder that behind the solemn beauty, there were hands. Tired ones, skilled ones. There is one tomb that draws more eyes than any other, the so-called royal tombs. A set of grand, towering facades high on the cliff, overlooking the city. Like a row of silent watchers. Were they truly royal? Perhaps. The architecture is more ambitious, the scale more generous. And yet, inside, they are just as quiet, just as plain. In the end, the stone treats all the same. The Nabateans built these tombs not just to mourn, but to preserve, to anchor memory in rock, to keep the names from fading with the wind. And though empires fell, trade routes vanished, and the city emptied out, the tombs remained still, watching, waiting. And today, when visitors come to Petra, what do they photograph first? The tombs. What do they whisper about at dusk? The tombs. What lingers longest in memory? Yes, the tombs, not for their size, not for their carvings, but for their stillness, their unapologetic silence. So let us sit here for a while. No need to hurry. The dead are not in a rush. And in Petra, neither are we. As we walk the sun-warmed alleys of Petra's long-lost quarters, let us turn our eyes inward into the home, into the quiet thresholds not lined with columns, but woven with cloth and scented with spices, into the lives of Nabatean women. Much of Petra's splendor lies in its public face, its tombs, its temples, its dazzling facades. But behind those grand walls, life pulsed in quieter rhythms. And there, behind drawn curtains and shaded courtyards, women held the city's center. History, you see, often forgets the hidden, especially when those lives leave fewer inscriptions and no monuments of stone. But clues remain, like scattered grains on a tiled floor, waiting for careful hands to brush them together. Start with the language. Many inscriptions in Petra include the names of women unusual for the ancient world. Nabatean women appear as donors to temples, as landowners, even as signatories on legal contracts. This tells us something vital. Their names mattered. Their choices mattered. They were not ghosts behind the veil. In the home, their presence was constant. Nabatean houses, though largely vanished, once ringed the hills around Petra's central valley. Built of softer stone or mud brick, many have. Eroded with time, but the footprints remain. Courtyards for gathering. Kitchens with grinding stones. Small shrines tucked into corners perhaps for a household deity or ancestor. Here, women oversaw more than the hearth. They managed resources, stored grain, made clothing, mixed perfumes, taught children, and likely kept the complex oral traditions alive, passing stories from one generation to the next, while threading needle through linen or tending to boiling pots. Their labor was both visible and invisible, woven into every garment, every roof covering, every clay jar filled with water. Clothing tells its own story. Fragments of dyed wool, woven belts, and glass beads found in Petra hint at a vibrant domestic. Artistry. Nabatean women likely wore layered garments, long tunics belted at the waist, light shawls or veils draped over the head, not as markers of restriction, but of elegance and protection from the desert sun. Jewelry, too, played a role. Earrings of silver or bronze, beaded necklaces, sometimes passed from mother to daughter, sometimes offered in burial. These were not only adornments, they were memory, status, lineage, and what of their voices? They may not echo from amphitheaters, but in religious life, Women may have held roles in local cults. Small altars within homes suggest household rituals offerings of incense, oil, or bread. These practices, though quiet, shape the city's rhythm more deeply than grand festivals. Imagine an ordinary afternoon. A woman kneels in a shaded corner of her courtyard. She grinds wheat with a rhythmic hum, her children playing nearby. A pot simmers over a low fire, perfuming the air with lentils, coriander, and garlic. Outside, the city buzzes, but within, time slows. She stands, wipes her hands, and steps toward the shrine. A small pinch of incense, a whispered word, a gesture of thanks or hope. No one records it, but it matters. Even today, archaeologists uncover names Abgar, Hagiu, Shokilu etched near. Tombs painted on pottery. Some belong to women. And though the lines are brief, the presence is profound. Petra's women did not build monuments, but they built memory. They walked its streets with baskets on their hips. They bargained in its markets. They taught its future poets to speak. And when the city faded, their stories faded more quickly because they were not carved into cliffs. But let us carve them now, in words. Let us sit beside that simmering pot, feel the wind tug at a cotton shawl, and listen to the low song of a mother soothing a child beneath the gaze of red stone. The city was not only stone. It was heartbeat, and heartbeat, dear listener, often sounds like a woman's voice. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the vast Arabian desert, where the horizon shimmers like a mirage, and the relentless sun casts long, wavering shadows over endless dunes. It is a place both breathtaking and brutal, a place where life is measured in water, shade, and the steady pulse of footsteps across sand. It is here, amidst this daunting expanse, that the Nabateans mastered an art that ensured their survival, the delicate craft of desert diplomacy. The Nabateans were not mere wanderers lost in the sands. They were traders, negotiators, and diplomats desert. Diplomats, if you will, who wove alliances with neighboring tribes, negotiated safe passage across perilous routes, and balanced power with patience. Imagine caravans threading like silver threads through the wilderness, laden with spices, silk, incense, and precious stones. But life on these trade routes was never easy. The desert is a place of extremes. Scorching days give way to cold, star-pierced nights. Sandstorms can rise without warning, swallowing footprints and erasing paths. Water is a treasure guarded jealously by oases, and every traveler knows that thirst is the desert's most cunning enemy. Nabatean traders relied not only on camels, their steadfast companions, but also on their deep knowledge of the land. They memorized every rocky outcrop, every thorny bush, every whisper of the wind that signaled change. Their survival depended on respect for the desert's rhythms and on the friendships they forged with desert tribes. It was not merely commerce that kept the caravans moving, but a network of trust. The Nabateans brokered peace where others saw only rivalry. When two tribes eyed the same well or grazing land, the Nabatean envoys would step in, offering gifts, promises, and sometimes subtle threats cloaked in diplomacy. Imagine a gathering under the endless night sky. The flicker of campfires casts warm light on weathered faces, while the scent of frankincense drifts through the air. Around these fires, stories were shared, deals struck, and alliances sealed. Such skillful negotiation was not without risk. Travelers could be robbed, betrayed, or stranded by sudden storms. Yet the Nabateans persisted, moving with grace and caution through the desert's vast silence. Their secret was simple: respect the land, respect its people, and move with humility. The caravans themselves were marvels of organization. Camels carried bundles carefully wrapped in cloth silks from China, spices from India, precious gems from distant mines, and the famous Arabian frankincense They could command fortunes in foreign markets. These goods were not merely traded. They were symbols of connection, weaving a vast web from east to west. At night, the caravans rested in hidden valleys or beneath the shelter of cliffs. The camels knelt in rows, their breath soft against the chill air. Traders shared simple meals, flatbreads, dried fruits, and goat cheese, while their eyes scanned the horizon, alert for threats. And what of the risks? Disease, starvation, and betrayal were constant shadows. The desert demanded vigilance. But so too did politics. The Nabateans balanced their independence against powerful neighbors, Romans, Greeks, and rival tribes. They sent envoys to distant courts, bearing gifts and letters, always aware that a misstep could bring ruin. Yet through all this, the Nabateans carved out a space for themselves, not just in stone, but in history. They turned a harsh land into a living artery of trade and culture. Imagine now the rhythm of their lives, the steady tramp of camels, the soft murmur of deals, the rustle of cloth, as goods were repacked, and the quiet prayers whispered beneath the stars. This was not a life of ease, but a life of resilience and cunning. And in that resilience, the Nabateans found their secret strength. Petra's red cliffs hold many secrets, not only in their towering facades and silent tombs, but also in the quiet marks etched upon their surface as words, carved into rock, painted on pottery, or scratched in hidden corners. These inscriptions are whispers from a vanished world. The Nabatean script, a graceful and fluid form of writing, is one of those whispers. It tells stories of trade, family, devotion, and everyday life, yet it remains a puzzle, an elusive language slowly fading into silence. Imagine tracing your fingers along the carved lines of an inscription on a temple wall, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. The letters, elegant and looping, speak of names long forgotten, of donors who gave offerings, of decrees that once governed city life. But the meanings are often fragmentary. The language itself is a hybrid born of Aramaic roots with subtle influences from Greek and Arabic tongues. Few can read these inscriptions today. The Nabatean script, like the city itself, is a ghostly remnant of a culture that disappeared as quietly as it had flourished. The inscriptions provide clues about Petra's society and religion. Some commemorate the gods, Ushara, the mountain god, or Al-Yuza, a goddess associated with fertility and protection. Others mark tombs with the names of those who sought to be remembered or recount stories of benefactors who supported temples and public works. But not all inscriptions are grand. Some are graffiti scribbles left by travelers, laborers, or children. A name, a date, a short phrase, a fleeting human moment carved into eternity. These small marks give Petra a heartbeat. They remind us that the city was not only stones and columns, but lives lived, stories told, moments shared. One particularly fascinating set of inscriptions appears near the narrow gorge that leads into Petra. These are warnings and prayers, meant to protect travelers from danger or ask for safe passage. Imagine the whispered hopes of a caravan leader carving these words by torchlight, seeking favor from unseen forces. Yet, as Petra's prominence waned, so too did the use of the Nabatean script. The rise of Greek and Latin as administrative languages, along with shifting political tides, caused the script to fade. Over centuries, it was replaced by others, and today it remains a scholarly mystery, pieced together by a handful of specialists. Inscriptions are not only text, but also art. The way letters curve, the spaces between words, the subtle decorations carved alongside, they all speak of aesthetic choices, of pride in one's language and culture. Imagine an artisan sitting with chisel and hammer, carefully shaping each letter, aware that these marks would outlast him. And yet, the script's vanishing is a quiet tragedy. For in each fading line lies a lost voice, a language that once sang. Through Petra's streets, now only whispered to those patient enough to listen. So when you next walk Petra's red corridors, pause and look closely at the stones around you. Trace the faint lines. Let the silent letters speak. You are touching the past. You are hearing a story not shouted, but murmured. A story of a people who built a city of stone, of sand, and of words. And though the language has all but vanished, the spirit endures, quiet, steady, and waiting. Imagine standing in the arid desert, where the heat bakes the stones and the wind carries whispers of ancient secrets. Water, the very essence of life, is scarce here yet. Petra flourished, a green oasis in a sea of dust. How, you might wonder, did the Nabateans manage to harness the scarce desert water and turn it into the lifeblood of a thriving city carved from rock? The answer lies in their remarkable mastery of hydraulic engineering, a gentle yet powerful art, blending observation, patience, and ingenuity. Picture the narrow Sick, the natural gorge that serves as the entrance to Petra. Here, hidden channels carved into the rock silently guide water from distant springs. These channels, subtle and precise, ensured that even the faintest trickle was captured and directed to where it was needed most. The Nabateans built dams, cisterns, and reservoirs, all carefully designed to capture and store rainwater during the brief desert storms. These structures were not mere pools, but carefully crafted systems, able to regulate water flow, prevent flooding, and provide for a growing population. Imagine a quiet morning in Petra, the air cool with the memory of night as the city's inhabitants begin their day. Children drink from fountains fed by these hidden channels. Gardeners tend to lush greenery that thrives against all odds. Merchants wash goods in stone basins, their hands gentle with the precious liquid. Water was life, and control of it meant control of the city's fate. This system required constant maintenance. Imagine the tireless workers, climbing narrow ledges, clearing channels clogged with sand, repairing cracked cisterns under the heat of the sun. It was labor that went unseen by most, but was vital for survival. The hydraulic genius extended beyond mere survival. It was a statement. The flow of water was a symbol of the Nabateans' power to tame the harshest elements, to bring beauty and order to the desert. Even the city's grand monuments were connected to this water network. Pools reflected carved facades, and gardens offered shade and respite. The sound of water trickling over stone was a calming presence, a lullaby for those who lived amidst the red cliffs. Yet the system was fragile. Droughts and political upheaval would eventually strain these networks, contributing to Petra's gradual decline. Still, the remains of these hydraulic marvels stand today, silent testament to a civilization that listened closely to the desert's whispers and learned to live in harmony with its rhythms. Imagine the water, flowing still beneath your feet, carrying the echoes of a city that once danced with the desert winds. Imagine waking in Petra as the rosy light of dawn creeps over the sandstone cliffs, softening their harsh edges into a warm embrace. The city stirs gently, the hush of early morning replaced by the gradual hum of activity. Now, picture yourself walking toward the heart of Petra, the bustling market square, the city's vibrant bazaar. Here, the scents of spices mingle with the dust and the earthy aroma of fresh bread. Vendors set up stalls, their wares carefully displayed on woven mats or wooden tables. Imagine the colors: rich saffron yellow, deep indigo, the vibrant reds of pomegranates piled high, and the gleam of polished copper vessels catching the morning light. The marketplace is alive with voices, the soft bargaining of traders, the laughter of children weaving through the crowd, the occasional bray of a donkey laden with goods. Merchants from distant lands offer silks and perfumes, frankincense and myrrh, while local farmers bring fresh fruits, olives, and herbs. Imagine the intricate patterns of woven carpets hanging from wooden beams, the delicate gleam of jewelry crafted by skilled artisans, and the carved wooden boxes containing precious spices. Each item tells a story of distant deserts, bustling ports, and the patient hands that shaped them. The bazaar is more than a place of commerce. It is a crossroads of cultures. Traders speaking Nabatean, Greek, Aramaic, and even early Arabic mingle and exchange not only goods, but ideas, stories, and news. The market is a mosaic of languages and faces, reflecting Petra's role as a hub connecting east and west. Amidst the crowd, you might notice a woman gently weighing dates on a small scale, her fingers worn yet steady. Nearby, a young apprentice eagerly watches a silversmith's hammering against metal, learning the delicate art that has been passed down through generations. The rhythm of the market is steady and comforting, a daily ritual that unites the city's diverse inhabitants. Here, deals are struck with a nod and a smile, and friendships are forged over shared cups of spiced tea. And yet, beneath the lively surface, there is a careful balance. The market's prosperity depends on the steady flow of caravans bringing goods across treacherous deserts and political frontiers. A delay in the caravan's arrival could mean scarcity and rising prices. Traders and buyers alike live with this quiet uncertainty. As the sun climbs higher, the market's energy swells, then begins to fade toward afternoon. The sounds soften, stalls are packed away, and the city settles into a quieter rhythm. But the market's pulse never truly stops. It will awaken again with the next dawn. Imagine yourself sitting at the edge of the square, watching as the market's life unfolds, each moment a gentle beat in Petra's ongoing story, each face a thread in its rich tapestry. And with that, the marketplace's day draws to a close, leaving behind a lingering sense of connection between people, places, and time itself. Imagine yourself stepping beyond Petra's grand tombs and majestic facades into the quieter corners where everyday life unfolded. Away from the carved grandeur, the rhythm of daily existence was shaped by the steady pulse of simple routines, intimate moments, and the constant presence of the desert. Picture a Nabatean household in the early morning light, the gentle warmth of the sun filtering through woven reed screens, casting dappled patterns across a stone floor. The scent of freshly ground grain mingles with the faint aroma of incense, drifting from a small shrine in the corner. Here, the family begins its day. Women clad in soft wool and linen robes dyed in earthy tones light the hearth, stirring a pot of barley porridge or flatbread dough. Children, their hair dark and curly, run barefoot over worn stones, chasing small animals or helping with chores. Men prepare for their tasks. Some ready their camels for caravan travel. Others tend to trade goods or craft tools. Life was modest, yet rich in its own way. The Nabateans understood the delicate balance between survival and celebration, work and rest. Imagine the weaving of textiles, the shaping of clay vessels, the careful preparation of meals seasoned with wild herbs. Water, always precious, is carried in clay jars from nearby springs, stored in cool cisterns. The family garden, small but vibrant, offers fresh greens and fragrant flowers, a reminder of life's persistence amid the desert's austerity. At mid-morning, the community gathers near wells or fountains, sharing news and stories while filling their containers. These moments, brief and unassuming, create bonds that tie the city's inhabitants together. The day unfolds slowly, marked by the sun's steady arc. In the afternoon, shade becomes a refuge. Families rest beneath fig trees or in cool alcoves. Carved into the rock, the sound of distant goats bleating mingles with the rustle of palm fronds, creating a gentle lullaby. Evenings bring soft light and quieter tasks. Meals are shared, often simple stews with grains and vegetables, flavored by the day's harvest or trade. The night sky, vast and jeweled, stretches above a silent witness to countless generations. Imagine the gentle conversations around flickering. Lamps, stories passed down in low voices, and the ever-present sense of connection to family, to community, and to the land itself. Though Petra is often remembered for its monumental stone wonders, it was this daily life steady, unpretentious, woven with care, that truly sustained the city's heart. Imagine a small chamber within Petra, where light filters softly through. A narrow window, illuminating a sturdy wooden table cluttered with scrolls, styluses, and pots of ink. Here sits a man of quiet importance, a Nabatean scribe. He is of middle age, his hands marked by years of careful work, his dark eyes steady and thoughtful beneath a furrowed brow. His robes are simple yet neat, the fabric worn but well cared. For this man is more than a mere recorder of accounts. He is a keeper of knowledge, a silent guardian of the city's stories. The scribe's day begins with the soft scratching of reed pens on papyrus. His task is to document trade agreements, taxes, correspondence, and legal decisions. Each symbol must be precise, every line deliberate. Imagine the patience required to master such a craft, the discipline to sit for hours as the world outside bustles on. He works alongside merchants, priests, and officials, translating between Aramaic, Greek, and Nabatean scripts. This multilingual skill makes him indispensable in a city where cultures and languages intersect like the many paths of the Silk Road. Yet, his role is not merely bureaucratic. The scribe holds the keys to secret economic balances, political intrigues, even the pulse of the city's ambitions and anxieties. Imagine the quiet tension in his chamber when rumors of shifting alliances or threats reach his ears, the weight of knowledge resting heavily on his shoulders. Though his work is often solitary, the scribe is woven into the social fabric. He drinks tea with traders, shares meals with family, and attends festivals. Yet his eyes often reflect a contemplative distance, as if he perceives not just the present, but the unfolding future of Petra. The scribe's life is a testament to the power of words, how recording reality can preserve it, challenge it, or even change it. He embodies the bridge between past and future, the whisper of memory amid the roar of history. Imagine sitting quietly beside him, watching the ink flow, feeling the rhythm of his steady hand, and hearing the soft murmur of a city's secrets unfolding in silent script. Imagine yourself standing at the mouth of the Sick, Petra's narrow, winding gorge. The cool shadows hug the towering sandstone cliffs on either side, their colors shifting from deep ochres to soft pinks, glowing faintly as the sun moves across the sky. The air is thick with the scent of earth and ancient stone, mingled with a whisper of desert winds. The Sick is more than a path. It is a mysterious threshold, a natural fortress carved by time and water, leading travelers into the heart of Petra. This slender passage twists and turns for nearly a mile, its walls rising sharply above, sometimes narrowing so tightly that only a sliver of sky is visible. Imagine the footsteps of countless caravan travelers, merchants, priests, and pilgrims threading this passage over centuries. Their voices echo softly, mingling with the occasional drip of water seeping from cracks and the flutter of birds that nest in hidden crevices. The Sick was both a protector and a gateway. Its natural design concealed the city, shielding it from harsh desert winds and unwelcome eyes. Yet it also welcomed those who came with purpose, merchants bearing silk and halayas, spices, traders with fragrant incense, and visitors drawn by Petra's enigmatic allure. Within the Sick's rocky embrace, ancient Nabateans engineered a sophisticated water system. Channels and tunnels carved into the rock captured precious rainwater, ensuring the city's survival. Imagine the quiet, steady flow of these channels, unseen but vital, sustaining life in this hidden oasis. But the Sick holds secrets beyond the practical. It is a place where light and shadow play tricks, where the walls seem to pulse with a life of their own. Stories whisper that the sick was also a spiritual passage, a journey from the mundane world into a sacred realm. As you walk slowly through this natural corridor, imagine the anticipation growing, the heart quickening in step with each twist, until finally the narrow walls part and reveal the city carved in stone, a breathtaking sight, both ancient and eternal. The sick is a reminder that Petra's magic lies not only in its grand facades but in the subtle harmony between nature and human ingenuity, a secret passage that invited the world into a hidden treasure. Imagine the quiet patience of archaeologists as they brush away centuries of dust and sand from Petra's weathered stones. Their careful hands uncover fragments of a past both grand and intimate, a city layered with stories waiting to be told. The first explorers to document Petra in the modern era found a place almost lost to memory, swallowed by desert sands and shrouded in mystery. Imagine their awe, standing before the rose-red facades, unsure whether they faced myth or reality. Excavations reveal that Petra was not a single moment frozen in time, but a living city shaped by generations of people. Each layer of soil, each shard of pottery, holds clues to daily lives, trade networks, and cultural exchanges. Picture the delicate process of piecing together fragments of ceramics painted with intricate designs, or the worn inscriptions etched into stone tablets. These remnants speak softly across the ages, telling of craftsmen, merchants, and families whose footsteps once echoed where modern visitors now tread. Archaeologists have uncovered water cisterns and tunnels, revealing the remarkable engineering skills that sustained Petra in the harsh desert. Imagine tracing these hidden channels, feeling the cool air that once carried vital water to homes and gardens long vanished. The mysteries deepen with each discovery. What was the purpose of the enigmatic tombs? How did Petra's society balance tradition and innovation? And what stories lie buried beneath the sands, yet to be revealed? The work is slow, methodical, a dance with time itself. As each artifact is cleaned and catalogued, a fuller picture emerges, a tapestry woven from the everyday and the extraordinary. Imagine standing beside these modern seekers, their eyes reflecting both wonder and respect as they listen to Petra's silent voice, coaxing its secrets from the shadows. Through archaeology, Petra's hidden city gradually speaks again, inviting you to listen and dream of a world where stone and spirit entwined beneath the desert sun. Imagine waking up in a home carved from stone, nestled close to one of Petra's grand tombs. The morning light filters softly through narrow windows, casting gentle patterns on walls that have witnessed centuries. Around you, the faint hum of daily life begins, a city stirring to greet another sun. Living in Petra meant embracing a world where the monumental and the mundane intertwined seamlessly. The tombs, carved with exquisite detail, stood as silent neighbors, reminders of ancestors and enduring legacies. Yet the living thrived alongside, their daily rhythms echoing through narrow alleys and open courtyards. Imagine children stepping lightly over worn stone paths, their laughter mingling with the calls of merchants setting up stalls. The scent of freshly baked bread wafts through the air, mingling with aromatic spices from distant lands brought by caravans. Families tended gardens carefully irrigated by the city's ingenious water system. Imagine hands brushing soil to coax life from the desert, delicate herbs and vegetables thriving despite the arid climate. The constant hum of water channels provided a soothing backdrop, a lullaby of survival. Artisans honed their crafts in shaded workshop spotters shaping clay, weavers twisting dyed threads, jewelers polishing intricate designs. Imagine the rhythmic sounds of their work, steady and calming, as time moved in measured beats. Life in Petra was a balance between tradition and adaptation. Social gatherings took place in quiet courtyards, where stories were shared beneath the stars in the warm glow of oil lamps. Imagine voices softened by the night, tales weaving history and hope, grounding the community. Even as the city's impressive tombs whispered of grandeur and eternity, daily life unfolded in small, intimate moments. A child's curious gaze, a merchant's cautious negotiation, a mother's gentle care. These were the threads stitching together the fabric of Petra's hidden world. In these rhythms, the city breathed, a living heart beating quietly beneath the desert's vast sky. Imagine the life of Petra's elite, those whose wealth and influence shaped the city's grandeur. Their homes perched above the bustling streets, carved with elegance, overlooking the vibrant heart of the city. These were places where power met privacy, where decisions quietly shaped destinies. The Nabatean elite were not just wealthy, they were guardians of culture, diplomacy, and trade. Imagine a courtyard filled with the scent of rare incense, the soft murmur of servants attending to their needs, and the rustle of fine fabrics worn with understated pride. These individuals controlled the flow of goods along the Silk Road's branches, negotiating alliances with distant rulers and managing Petra's complex water systems that sustained the city. Imagine them seated in shaded rooms, maps, and ledgers, spread before them, balancing ambition with caution. Yet, behind closed doors, life held familiar comforts and rituals. Family dinners were moments of connection, where stories were shared and futures planned. Imagine flickering candlelight, casting shadows on walls adorned with frescoes and carvings, a gentle reminder of tradition and beauty. The elite's lives were marked by contrasts, a constant dance between public display and private refuge. They hosted gatherings to impress visiting dignitaries and caravan leaders, showcasing Petra's prosperity. Imagine musicians softly playing stringed instruments as guests sip fragrant teas and admire the intricate stonework. Despite their status, the Nabatean elite were part of the city's rhythm. Their children played in the same courtyards where merchants bartered, and they participated in festivals that echoed the city's deep spirituality. In the hidden city of Petra, power was as much about stewardship as dominance, a careful balance of honoring the past and embracing the present. The elite lived within this delicate harmony, their stories woven into the city's enduring tapestry. Imagine standing by a cool, clear spring tucked away amid Petra's rugged cliffs. The desert sun beats down relentlessly, but here, water flows, like a gentle whisper, sustaining life where it might seem impossible. This water was Petra's lifeblood, an engineering wonder hidden beneath the stone. The Nabateans mastered the art of capturing and directing water with a subtlety that still fascinates modern minds. Imagine narrow channels, carved meticulously into rock, guiding every precious drop. Cisterns carved underground caught rainwater, storing it safely against dry seasons. The city's waterworks were more than practical necessities. They were silent guardians of daily life. Imagine farmers, tending crops nurtured by these unseen streams, children playing near fountains where water bubbled like laughter. The system was so efficient that Petra flourished in a landscape others found unforgiving. This mastery of water was part science, part art. Imagine the Nabatean engineers studying the landscape, learning where rock fractures would channel rain, where shadows would cool reservoirs. Their innovations allowed Petra not only to survive, but to thrive as a vibrant trade hub. The water system's secrets were carefully guarded, passed down through generations. Imagine the pride in those hands that shaped stone channels, the knowledge etched into memory like the very rock they carved. Even today, walking Petra's paths, you can almost hear the quiet song of water flowing in echo of a city's resilience and its deep harmony with the desert's rhythms. Imagine the dusty roads stretching far beyond the horizon, where camel caravans wove like threads across the fabric of the ancient world. Petra sat at the crossroads of these great routes, its fate intertwined with the steady passage of traders and goods. The caravans brought with them scents and stories from distant land, spices that tickled the nose, silks shimmering like desert mirages, and precious metals that caught the sun's glint. Imagine merchants unloading their burdens at Petra's gates, exchanging goods and languages as varied as the treasures themselves. Life on the caravan was a rhythm of patience and endurance. Imagine the slow, steady pace of camels navigating rocky passes, the campfires flickering beneath endless skies, and the whispered prayers to gods both old and new. Petra's merchants knew how to navigate this world. Imagine bustling markets alive with haggling voices and the clinking of coins, where every trade was both a risk and a promise. This flow of commerce brought wealth, but also changed new ideas. Fashions and customs blended into Petra's own rich culture. Imagine the city as a living mosaic, shaped by every traveler who passed through. The caravans were the veins through which Petra's prosperity pulsed, constant, steady, and life-giving. They carried not only goods, but connections, weaving Petra into the grand story of the ancient world. Picture, if you will, a city without bookshelves. No stacks of papyrus scrolls lining library walls. No quiet halls echoing with the turning of parchment pages. And yet, Petra's people learned, skilled, and worldly left their messages everywhere. You just had to know where to look. Carved into rock faces, etched onto the lintels of tombs, or inked onto clay pots now weathered by time. The Nabateans told their stories not through tomes or manuscripts, but by inscribing their world directly onto its surfaces. Their script, Nabatean Aramaic, was a delicate, looping system that whispered rather than shouted, flowing like water over the curves of stone. The scribes, though fewer in number than artisans or traders, held immense quiet. Power. Imagine one perched cross-legged beside a newly carved tomb, stylus in hand, carefully shaping each word that would carry someone's name into eternity. No grand ceremony, just patience, just stone, and ink, and meaning. These inscriptions weren't just about death. They marked ownership, trades, prayers, dedications, and debts. They recorded laws and offerings, greetings and thanks. One might find a name beside a sacred nishi to Dushara, from Malik son of Wahab, simple and eternal, outlasting even the memory of the person who carved it. And then there were the graffiti. Yes, even in Petra, ancient travelers couldn't resist leaving a mark. Along caravan trails and temple walls, you might spot brief, impromptu scrawls. Some were names, others blessings. A few were jokes, faint but legible after 2,000 years. They were the ancient equivalent of "I was here," a reminder that human beings, however timeless their setting, often act in familiar ways. Now imagine a young apprentice scribe learning his art from a stoic elder, tracing the same looping letters over and over into soft clay before committing them to rock. He doesn't yet understand the weight of words, only that each stroke must be precise. His hands, dust-covered, steady. His brow furrowed with concentration. Petra may not have left U.S. libraries in the modern sense, but the city itself became its manuscript. A book of walls and corners, of ceremonial facades and weather-worn cliffs, each bearing a chapter or two in the long, quiet tale of a desert people who wrote without paper. And so, the scribes of Petra worked in the margins of time chroniclers, who trusted stone more than ink, and silence more than speech. Let us slip inside a home now, not one of kings or priests, but an ordinary dwelling nestled in Petra's quieter quarter, away from the noise of merchants and camels. Here, life unfolded slowly, like the stretch of light across the sandstone. Hills each morning. The house is modest, its walls carved directly from rose-colored rock. No bricks, no beams. Just space shaped from earth, softened with textiles, and warmed by flame. Its doorways framed by linen curtains that sway with the dry breeze, fluttering like the breath of the city itself. Inside, it smells faintly of cedar ash and cardamom. Imagine a low fire in the corner hearth, its coals still alive from the morning's meal. Around it sit a few simple pots, worn smooth with use, and above it an oil lamp, suspended on a metal hook, gently swinging. The walls are not bare. Oh no. Imagine painted patterns, ochres and reds, and burnt orange forming swirls or stylized flowers, or perhaps geometric bands that echo the shapes seen in Petra's grand facades. Artistry, even here in the humblest corners. On the floor, woven. Mats of reed and wool cushion weary feet. There are no chairs, no tables. People sit close to the earth, eating from shared dishes, telling stories in the flickering lamplight. The house holds warmth not just in temperature, but in tone. It cradles its inhabitants like a worn, beloved cloak. Daily routines here followed the sun's rhythm. The women ground flour before dawn, their stone querns singing a rhythmic hush. Children fetched water from nearby channels, balancing clay jars with careful grace. Men mended tools or tended goats, their voices drifting through the air like murmured wind. Meals were simple flatbread, lentils, dates, olives. Not extravagant, but seasoned with herbs grown in pots by the door. And always shared. Clothing was functional, but cared for. Picture linen tunics softened with wear, and woolen cloaks for colder nights. Jewelry, when worn, was humble, beads of polished stone, perhaps a copper ring handed down through generations. But it was scent that defined the Petra home most vividly. The Nabateans adored perfume, not just for status or ceremonies, but for daily life. Oils of myrrh, cinnamon, and frankincense were stored in tiny alabaster jars, their lids sealed with beeswax. A guest might be welcomed with a dab of perfumed oil to the wrist or hair. Even the walls absorbed it over time. And so, despite the harshness of the desert, beauty lingered. It was in the painted corners, in the low hum of a hand-carved flute, in the warm steam rising from a pot of cumin and lentils. This was life at its most human, quiet, cyclical, and tender. No monuments, no legends. Just breath, warmth, and the slow unfolding of ordinary days in an extraordinary city. When the sun sank behind Petra's cliffs, casting long golden shadows over the stone facades, the city didn't fall silent all at once. It hushed gently. A quieter Petra emerged, one that stretched, yawned, and settled into itself like a cat curling beneath a blanket. The day's heat slipped away slowly, and with it the sounds of clattering bronze, creaking carts, and bargaining. Voices. In the dimming light, people moved with softer steps. The last goats were herded in. Pot lids clattered shut. Flames in courtyard hearths glowed instead of blazed. Even the ever-curious children, who had raced along alleys in the daylight, now hovered near doorways, drowsy-eyed and dust-covered. So how did Petra sleep? Some, of course, had stone houses. Families lay close on woven mats, a single oil lamp casting low, amber light on the walls. The night air crept in gently through carved windows or simple linen drapes. A few families burned juniper or myrrh to keep insects and evil spirits at bay, though whether it worked or not is unclear. Still, it smelled nice. Others, like shepherds or caravan guards, slept outdoors. Picture a man wrapping himself tightly in a wool cloak, his head resting on a saddlebag, the stars his only ceiling. There was no shortage of stargazers here. Petra's nights, unpolluted, crisp, and velvet dark, offered the kind of sky that made you believe in ancient gods again. Orion was clearer than any temple carving. Venus rose with such brilliance it could wake you if you'd forgotten to. Shield your eyes. And the city had its own lullaby, the soft rustling of acacia leaves, the wind whispering through narrow sicks, the distant, hollow calls of nightbirds. Occasionally, a camel might grunt in its sleep, sounding a little like a disgruntled neighbor. But sleep in Petra wasn't without its rituals. Some recited prayers to Dushara, god of the mountains. Others whispered charms against snakes or thieves, two nighttime hazards that required a bit more than a soft pillow. There were even lullabies, sung in Nabatean dialects now lost to time, probably a bit off-key, but carried with maternal tenderness. Just the same, homes closed up for the night, but not entirely. Doors were latched loosely enough to keep animals out, but not neighbors. Hospitality did not sleep in Petra. If someone knocked at your door under the stars seeking refuge, shelter, or simply a place to rest, you didn't refuse. It would have been scandalous. And yet there was always one eye open. Guards at the city's gates rotated watch. Torches sputtered on temple steps. Older men, too proud to admit they were aging, stood post near tea trails, arms folded, pretending not to doze. Petra, after all, was a trading capital, and cities with gold and spice in their storerooms didn't sleep too soundly. As for the dreams, who knows what Petra's people dreamt? Perhaps of rain-rare and welcome, or of long-lost cousins riding in from Palmyra, or of gods that danced atop moonlit cliffs, whispering secrets into the desert air. But as dawn approached, the city would stir again, not with abrupt alarm, but with gentle awareness. Embers would be coaxed back into flame, pottery lids lifted, feet stretched, eyes rubbed. And just like that, Petra awoke peacefully, patiently, as though the stars themselves had kissed it back into life. Petra, like all cities that shine too brightly, did not burn forever. No matter how well it was carved, no matter how deep its water channels, or how fragrant its incense, time merciless and unblinking had its way. Let's not be hasty, though. The fall didn't happen overnight. Cities rarely tumble like dominoes. They erode slowly like sandstone under rain. It began with a shift in the trade winds. By the 3rd century CE, new routes had begun to favor the sea. Merchant ships now bypassed the desert altogether, coasting along safer waters to Egypt, Byzantium, and further east. The caravans that once snaked toward Petra's gates dwindled, one by one. And so, the city built on trade found itself sitting at a crossroads that no one used anymore. The Romans took over too. They brought baths, columns, and a more standardized kind of order. But while Petra adjusted, it also lost something. The bold flair of the Nabateans dinned beneath Roman marble and Latin inscriptions. Roads were paved. Yes, but hearts? Perhaps not. Then came nature, ruthless as ever. In the year 363 CE, an earthquake struck. Not just a rumble, but a ruinous jolt. Temples cracked, homes collapsed, water channels split. Some parts of Petra, those most intricately carved, suffered irreparably. And while some rebuilding occurred, it wasn't enough to restore what had already been drifting away. By the time the Byzantines arrived, Petra had become quieter. Churches rose where temples once stood. Mosaics replaced incense altars. A Christian bishopric was established, but the old gods had already gone silent. And still, Petra endured. Even in its so-called decline, people lived there. Shepherds and stonemasons. A few priests. Perhaps a merchant or two, still dreaming of the city's golden age. But it was no longer the bustling jewel of Arabia. It had become something else quieter, less adorned, but still breathing. By the early Islamic era, Petra was nearly forgotten. Desert sands crept inward. Doorways became half-buried. The sick echoed not with footfall, but with wind. And the city began its long, slow exhale into myth. Centuries passed. Crusaders wandered through, unimpressed. Bedouin tribes took shelter in the old tombs, lighting fires beneath the same domes, where kings once stood. And in time, The city stopped being a city at all. It became a ghost. A stunning ghost, to be sure. But not until the 19th century did outsiders begin to take notice again. A Swiss traveler in disguise, then British scholars, archaeologists with wide eyes and trowels. And slowly, painfully, Petra was remembered. Yet for over 1,000 years, it had lived in silence. No crowds, no merchants. Just rock and sky and time. It's humbling, isn't it? To think of a city so grand, so essential, slipping quietly into the cracks of history, waiting for someone to care enough to notice again. But Petra didn't complain. It simply waited. Stone, after all, is patient. For over a millennium, Petra remained silent, so completely forgotten by the outside world that even maps gave up on it. Not lost, exactly. Petra never moved. She just kept still, waiting for someone to listen. Then, in 1812, a Swiss traveler named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt stumbled upon the hidden city, not by accident, but by cunning. Disguised in Bedouin robes and calling himself Ibrahim ibn Abdallah, he wasn't merely a tourist. He was a scholar, trained in Arabic, determined to uncover ancient secrets buried beneath centuries of sand and secrecy. He'd heard whispers, place carved into rose-colored cliffs, guarded by tribes who didn't take kindly to outsiders. The locals knew of Petra, of course. They called it Wadi Musa, the Valley of Moses. But they weren't keen on pointing out the path to every curious European with a notepad and an ego. So Burckhardt played it smart. He posed as a pilgrim wishing to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses, conveniently located on a hill just beyond the city. With a guide and a goat and a perfectly rehearsed backstory, he passed through the sick and stood before the treasury. And just like that, Petra was no longer silent. He couldn't linger. That would have been suspicious. He scribbled notes in secret, committed every detail to memory. The ornate columns, the weathered statues, the impossible grandeur of it all. He had seen something miraculous, and he knew it. When Burckhardt finally published his findings years later, the world took notice. Suddenly, Petra was no longer a forgotten whisper in the desert. It was a destination, an enigma, a place people yearned to see, not for spices or incense anymore, but for wonder. The 19th century brought a trickle of explorers, then photographers, then archaeologists. By the early 20th century, full excavations were underway. Dust was blown from inscriptions. Columns were unearthed from rubble. A language long thought lost began to whisper again through stone fragments and temple floors. But even as Petra was uncovered, it remained stubbornly mysterious. How exactly had the Nabateans built such precise facades with such limited tools? What rituals were performed in the high places? Who lay buried in those tombs that towered like mountains? Scholars speculated, artists painted, writers waxed poetic. T.E. Lawrence, yes, that Lawrence of Arabia called it the most wonderful place in the world. Romantic, certainly. Slightly exaggerated? Perhaps. But then again, Petra had that effect on people. Still, the rediscovery brought complications. The local Bedouin, who had made homes within the carved tombs for generations, suddenly found themselves being studied, photographed, and eventually moved. In the 1980s, the Jordanian government resettled many of them outside the archaeological zone in the nearby village of Sehon. It was, as these things often are, bittersweet. Preservation came at a cost. Petra was no longer just a place to live. It was a heritage site, a national symbol, and eventually, thanks to UNESCO, world treasure. Tourists arrived by the thousands, then tens of thousands. Camera flashes replaced firelight. Souvenir stands cropped up near the sick. Horse-drawn carts zipped down ancient trails that once echoed with camel hooves and whispered prayers. And yet, Somehow, Petra endured it all, because it had always been a city of thresholds, between desert and mountain, east and west, myth and memory. Rediscovery didn't diminish her mystery. If anything, it deepened it. And for the people of Jordan, Petra wasn't just a relic. It was pride made stone. School children visited in wide-eyed awe. Scholars deciphered Nabatean scripts in university libraries. Artisans carved miniature treasuries from local rock, just like their ancestors had shaped entire cities from cliffs. But perhaps most magical of all were the moments when the crowds thinned and the echoes returned, when the wind moved through the canyons just right and the sun caught the treasury in. That perfect golden angle. In those moments, Petra didn't feel rediscovered. She felt eternal, and maybe that's the real story. Not just that someone found Petra, but that Petra allowed herself to be found with dignity, with grace, with the quiet patience of a city that had seen empires come and go, earthquakes crumble temples, languages fade, and memories dissolve into dust. She had waited, yes, but not passively. She stood. And when the time was right, she opened her gates once more, not with noise or fanfare, but with the soft hush of wind against stone, like a whisper to a returning friend. And Burckhardt, for all his disguises, was just the first to hear her speak again. Before the archaeologists arrived, before the scholars and tourists ever imagined Petra as a treasure to be catalogued and marveled at, there were those who already knew her intimately, quietly, and without maps. These were the Bdol Bedouins, descendants of nomads who had lived among Petra's tombs and caves for generations. To them, Petra wasn't a discovery. It was home. They lived in the carved-out chambers of the facades tourists now photograph with breathless awe. To the Bdol, these weren't monuments. They were shelters, storage, sleeping quarters. The grand rock-cut tombs served as places to rest during the hot summer days and as safe havens during desert storms. You could imagine children playing beside the columns of the urn tomb, goats chewing at dry brush near the steps of the monastery, families cooking flatbread over open fires in the shadow of the royal tombs. They didn't need archaeological theories to explain the stone streets or the cisterns they used them. Some families collected rainwater in Nabatean reservoirs. Others guided their flocks along trails that had existed since Roman times. They didn't interpret Petra. They inherited. And when Petra was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1985, everything changed. In a sweeping effort to preserve the site from erosion, looting, and uncontrolled habitation, the Jordanian government pressured by international heritage. Organizations relocated the Bdol from Petra's ancient caves into a nearby village. Called Seyhoun, stone dwellings were built. Compensation was offered. Petra, the officials said, needed to be protected. But for many Bdol families, it felt less like protection and more like eviction. Imagine being told that the place your ancestors had lived in for centuries, had raised children in, had told stories in, had quietly died in was no longer yours. That the home you didn't think of as historic, just familiar, was now too important for you to live in. They weren't squatters after all. They were Petra's caretakers before the world took notice. Still, in the face of this change, the Bdol adapted with dignity and resilience. Many became Petra's new stewards in a different way. They served as guides, translators, mule wranglers, and camel handlers. Their knowledge of the trails, the shortcuts, the weather patterns, and even the rock's temperament became invaluable to both tourists and researchers. They could tell when a flash flood was brewing from a distant breeze. They knew which caves would remain dry and which would leak. They could recite names for unmarked ruins, passed down orally through generations. But the relationship was never entirely even. Some archaeologists distrusted the Bdol's presence in the site, accusing them of interfering with digs or selling looted artifacts to tourists. Others romanticize them, casting them as noble savages in desert scarves, their camels silhouetted against Petra's rose-red glow. Few took time to understand the nuance that the Dole were neither relics nor intruders, but living people whose identity had been shaped by the sandstone itself. Over the years, debates continued. Should the Biol be allowed to return to certain caves? Should tourism profits be shared more equitably with them? Was Petra a place to be preserved under glass, or a living landscape still evolving? These questions echoed between ancient facades and modern fences, and no answer seemed to satisfy all. Today, as you walk Petra's stone streets, it's easy to overlook the Bdol. You might see them riding donkeys past the treasury, or selling bracelets by the colonnaded street. You might hear them calling out in Arabic, English, French offering tea, or a handmade necklace. But look a little closer, and you'll notice more. How they greet one another with deep familiarity. How they know exactly when to move out of the sun. How they step lightly and instinctively across loose rock. They aren't visitors. They are still part of Petra's rhythm. One elder once described Petra as a sleeping lion, beautiful, silent, powerful. To live here, he said, you must walk softly, speak gently, and listen. Because Petra remembers. It remembers the Nabatean stonemason who etched camel carvings into a temple wall. It remembers the Roman soldier who tossed a coin into a cistern before marching east. It remembers the Byzantine monk who lit his oil lamp every dawn and scribbled psalms on plaster walls. And it remembers the Bedouin woman who gave birth in a cool cave during the summer rains. These memories don't belong to one people. They don't fit neatly into museum displays or UNESCO pamphlets. They live in Petra's silence. And the Bdol, perhaps more than anyone, have learned to listen. Their songs echo in the narrow canyons. Their stories linger at the edge of campfires. Their footprints are pressed into trails archaeologists haven't yet mapped. Some of the elders still walk into Petra alone, early in the morning, before the ticket booths open and the crowds arrive. They pass through the sick in silence, brush their hands along the rock walls, and pause before the treasury, not as tourists, but as witnesses. They don't need to take pictures. The stone remembers for them. So when you visit Petra, when you pass the camels, the guides, the souvenir stands, remember the Bdol. Speak to them, if you can. Ask about the caves, the ghosts, the wells that never run dry. Because while empires have risen and fallen, and scholars have come and gone, Petra's truest guardians have always been those who live not above her, but within her. There is a certain stillness that hangs over Petra after the last tourist is gone, when the sun leans low and the soft gold of evening gathers along the edges of the sandstone. The air quiets. The donkeys are led home. The souvenir stalls close. One by one, footsteps fade, and in their place, something else returns, something deeper. It is in this hush that Petra is most herself, not a spectacle, not a postcard, but a city that remembers. By day, Petra wears 1,000 faces. She is the wonder of Instagram selfies, of noisy tour groups, of souvenir stands piled high with authentic antiquities made last week in Amman. She is the dusty clatter of mule hooves, the scent of sweat and camel leather, the guide speaking 5 languages with practiced charm. She is commerce, curiosity, and confusion. But by night, she becomes again what she has always been, ancient, layered, unknowable. The moonlight reveals details the sunlight misses, the delicate erosion of a weathered column, the faint Nabatean script near a tomb's edge, the quiet breath of wind that slides through the sick like a forgotten prayer. There are no crowds to interrupt, only the rhythm of rock and time. Petra doesn't need to shout, she waits. Today, Petra stands at a strange crossroad. She is a global symbol of Heritage Jordan's crown jewel, protected by UNESCO, studied by universities, photographed by millions. Yet she is also a place of delicate tension. Tension between conservation and livelihood, between excavation and preservation, between memory and spectacle. Over 5,000 visitors enter Petra on busy days. They come from every continent, drawn by the allure of the lost city and its dramatic treasury facade. But few understand how fragile she is beneath the surface. The steps worn down by sandals and hooves, the walls scarred by fingers, graffiti, erosion, the ancient water channels clogged by modern debris. The balance of rock and silence slowly tipping toward noise and wear. Archaeologists worry. Tour guides worry. Even the Bedouin worry. Petra cannot be rebuilt. Her stone is her story. And every touch, every careless boot or camera tripod leaves a mark. But how do you preserve a city of memory without silencing the people who still live with her? The debate continues. In recent years, initiatives have emerged: local heritage programs, community-run tourism, archaeological training for young Jordanians. There are efforts to involve the Dole Bedouins, not just as guides or performers, but as full partners in Petra's stewardship. Projects to map less visited trails help ease the pressure on the core sites. Restorations are more careful, more collaborative. There's talk of limiting visitor numbers, of rotating access, of new museums to hold fragile objects rather than leaving them to the elements. And yet, for all the science and policy and planning, Petra's true endurance may come from something else entirely: her patience. She has waited before, waited through the collapse of the Nabatean kingdom, waited while Roman columns fell, while Byzantines turned temples into churches, while sandstorms buried entire quarters. She waited through centuries when no one knew her name, when maps called her ruins and poets imagined her as myth. She is used to waiting, and she watches. For all her grandeur, Petra is never loud. She whispers. She invites those willing to listen, not just to the grand facades, but to the cracks, the shadows, the ordinary spaces between the marvels. The courtyard where children once played marbles. The soot marks from forgotten fires on the ceiling of a cave home. The worn path where generations fetched water. These details will never make the brochures, but they are what bind Petra to humanity. Because, for all the gods and kings and conquerors who passed through her gates, Petra was always most alive in the hands of her ordinary people, the stonemasons and merchants, the mothers and midwives, the potters and pilgrims. And in that sense, she is still alive. You can feel it in the early mornings, before the ticket booths open, when a soft breeze moves through the sick and the rock glows rose and peach. A Bedouin elder might walk past, nodding politely, carrying stories no history book has captured. A boy leads a mule with practiced calm. A girl sells tea from a tin kettle, her fingers curled around a worn cup. These are Petra's living memories, moving, breathing, anchoring the past in the present. And you, too, become part of her the moment you step inside. You join the long procession of wanderers, the Nabatean caravan guard staring at a sandstone. Altar in 100 BCE, the Roman engineer puzzling over a cistern. The 19th century European explorer sketching by lantern light. The modern traveler pausing, mouth slightly open, at the first glimpse of the treasury. You are a moment in her gaze, a brief echo in her long song. Petra does not ask for worship. She does not demand belief. She asks only this, that you see her. Not just the monuments, but the spaces in between. Not just the history, but the humanity. Not just the past, but the quiet resilience of the present. As the sun sets on the final day of your journey, and the cliffs begin to purple, you may feel something hard to name, a kind of grief that this place will go on without you, that Petra will outlast your footsteps, your photographs, your memories. But that is her gift. You leave, and she remains patient, silent, watching as she always has.